Hi, everyone. I'm Pooja Rajiv, a newly credentialed ACC coach. I got my ACC certification a few days ago, and I knew the moment I had got it that the first thing I wanted to do was to share my experience with you. I guess the main thing is it's a new exam, right? I mean, they introduced this in November, middle of November. And so there's not an awful lot of stuff out there on the internet where one can get an idea of how the exam works. What was the experience of the person giving the exam? Um, and while there are some videos, and I will point them out during this short video presentation, I did feel that there was a gap that I thought I could help plug, especially since I have also taken the previous version of the exam. So I could also help do a short comparison. So this video here will talk a little bit about my experience, the comparison between the old ACC format and the new one, some learning experiences, some tips. I end off with a really cool game that I sort of devised to help me make the learning a little bit more fun and to familiarize myself with the core ethics and the core competencies. Um, so I'd love to share that with you. To give you a brief background about what exactly I do, I'm a transformational life coach. I work with teens, youth, young professionals, and really anybody navigating transition. I got my coaching degree about 3.5 years ago or 3 years ago with IPEC. It's an amazing institution that really built up our skills very well, and it focuses on core energy coaching. Before I became a full-time coach, I was a business journalist. So if you haven't left yet, and if you're still wanting to know about my experience, let me dive right in. Um, oh, yes, I also want to warn you that this video is raw, it's unedited. I'm not a professional videographer. I'm not a professional or a usual YouTuber. So whatever you see is really because I want to help you in your journey towards getting credentialed as an ACC coach. So I took the old ACC exam in September last year, and I missed getting my credential by 6 points. That really hurt. Um, while it was a great experience to have gone through the exam, and I do feel I got a little bit more confidence after having sat through it once. Um, it did pinch that I was just one or two questions away from the right answer. But on the other hand, I also felt a little disappointed because even if I were to study for another month or 2 months, there was no way of knowing whether I would actually pass the next time because the exam was so nuanced. The best answer and the worst answer. Who even thinks of the worst answer? And more than that, the choices were just ever so slightly nuanced. Would you rather, is it better to lie to your client, or is it better to hide something from them, or is it better to be rude to them? I just found it very overwhelming. So luckily, ICF must have heard what all of us ACC hopeful coaches are saying, and they changed the format. I decided I'm going to get my ACC certification as soon as I can before ICF changes their mind again. So here are some of the differences between the two exams. If you give me a second, I will just share this one document with you. Okay. So this is the previous ACC exam, and this is the new exam since November 18th, 2024. So in the previous exam, each question consisted of a long and very confusing paragraph. Now, I was a journalist for many, many years, and I've worked with the newswires. I was a reporter with the newswires. So I can read reams of information very fast and analyze it as well. But this exam threw me off completely. The new ACC exam are short two-line easier to understand questions. So what they're testing you on is really your knowledge rather than your interpretation of the question. Secondly, in the exam I took in September last year, the ICF had switched to using pronouns like they, them, their. And I don't know about you as people viewing this video, but in Asia, that's not a common practice. So I just got very confused as I went through the paragraph. Well, wait, is it the coach saying it or is it the client saying it? Here in the new ACC exam, there was no confusion because the questions are short, crisp, and clear. All right. Now we come to the next pet grief that I know a lot of people have, and it is we had to choose the best answer and the worst answer in the earlier format. Plus, that was done with a drag and drop function, which in my case, I found very difficult to do. We all know how difficult the worst answer can be. Here, there's only the best answer that we have to choose for. However, even though the previous ACC exam was highly nuanced and it was hard to know the correct answer, the new ACC exam can also be a little tricky at times. Even though it's more straightforward, there are a few questions, and I'm going to tackle this in a little while to explain to you where those tricky questions come in. But there are some trick questions that you need to be aware of. Then in the previous exam, it was only 3 hours long. In this exam, it's about 1.5 hours long with the 10-minute break. Yoo-hoo, which means we get a little bit more time. Then in the earlier system, there was only an option to flag. At least I think there wasn't any other option. Here, there's an option to flag, strike through, and highlight. To be honest, I did not use the strike through and highlight functions because, as I will explain later on, you do have to be fast in answering the questions. So I just thought it's going to take me too much time to use these various functions. I did, however, liberally use the flag option. Now let's have a look at some of the things that you will probably already be doing. So I cannot emphasize this enough. Please go through the ICF website really carefully. I say this because the exam is really 30, 30, 40. 30% is coaching ethics, 30% is definition and boundaries of coaching, 40% is coaching competencies, strategies, and techniques. So if you know your coaching ethics, coaching competencies, those are what I refer to as plain vanilla. They're really, you know it or you don't sort of a question. The definition and boundaries of coaching is where the tricky questions come in. So I will get to that, but let's just check out which are the videos that helped me. I liked Daniel Alexa's videos. And by the way, I have no connection with any of these people. And I definitely don't get a commission from recommending them. I really just want you guys to get the best resources that you can. So I found Daniel Alexa's videos pretty interesting and helpful. Lisa DeHart and Elise Park. So the other things, of course, the practice questions on the ICF website and others that you may find on the internet could be good. Please don't use the questions in the old format unless you are thinking of going for the credentialing exam. I believe until the 14th of March, you can switch, instead of doing the ACC exam, do the credentialing exam, which will give you a PCC credential, right? But the new format is really different from the old one. So if you know you're just going to go for the ACC credential, there's no point getting yourself confused answering the old format. Having said that, like I mentioned, there are some tricky bits. So I'm going to stop sharing here and delve into what it is that, these other videos have not told you about. So the tip number one that I want to share with you is just because this exam is easier, it doesn't mean it's easy. And this is the mistake that I made. I kind of took it a little easy because I had taken the previous exam and I knew how challenging it was. There is a time crunch in this exam, and there are times when you narrow your options down to two, and then you're sitting on the fence, not knowing whether it's one or the other. So those questions really come in when, the interesting thing is, as a coach, we know what is the best thing that we would do. We know what's the best course of action and what we would definitely do. But sometimes the questions that they give you or the answer options that they give you are not the best, but the suboptimal ones. So it gets confusing. Well, you wouldn't do either of them. So which one is it? And that's where it can be a little confusing. So the way I tackle this is, and I kind of figured, well, the ICF probably does this because as coaches, we're constantly thinking on our feet. We're constantly faced with new situations, and we have to rely on either our gut or think, or being thinking on our toes. So what I did was I didn't overthink these answers, and I immediately chose an answer that I felt comfortable with at that point, and then I flagged the question. At the end of the section, when I got a chance to review the flags, I went back and I have to say, I definitely had a little more clarity at the end of each section. And I went back and I finally chose my final answer. So that was my tip number one. Tip number two, because you can be faced with these tricky questions, I focused on getting the plain vanilla questions right. Plain vanilla, as I mentioned earlier, were code of ethics and core competencies. Now, again, I did slip up a little bit and I didn't prepare the code of ethics as well as I should have. And I did find myself in the middle of the exam saying, I wished I had spent a little bit more time on that. So, but the thing with these questions is ICF has already spelled the answers out for us in this. So we know what's the correct answer. We know what's the wrong answer. And there's no ambiguity at all. And that's what I like about these questions. And that's why I call it plain vanilla. Either it's right or it's not. So if I figured if 70% of the questions are based on this right or wrong answer, and if I could get even 60% of that, surely I could pass the exam because I would get many of the other tricky questions correct as well. I mean, after all, we've been practicing for a while now. So now, how did I prepare for the core competencies and code of ethics? My tip number three is acronyms totally rule. Now, the first time I was introduced to this acronym concept was Lisa DeHart. I know a lot of people talk about that, but I really liked what Elise Park spoke about. She's a fellow IPEC graduate, so yes, I'm a fan. She came out with an acronym to remember the core competencies. So because I liked that and that modality worked for me, I decided to go into the subheads and make little acronyms for myself within each core competency. So I'm going to share my screen with you again and tell you how it actually works. So, okay. Acronyming your way to success. So for instance, core competency 2 embodies a coaching mindset. The acronym I came up with is Cora Hype. What I did was, from the subdivisions, I took out the word or phrase that stands out most to me. And then I took the first letter of that to make that my target letter. So in Cora Hype, you can see it's client-centric, ongoing learning, reflective practice, aware of influence of context and culture, uses intuition, regulates emotions, prepares for sessions, seeks help if necessary. You'll notice that I didn't do it in order. And that's because I tried to do it in order, but I couldn't remember IEPH. But when I made it hype, I found it easier to remember. So you could do this for all the 8 competencies and probably even for the coaching ethics. Like I mentioned, I didn't do it for the ethics. I wished I had, but I did do it for the competencies. Then what I did was, and again, this is something I learned from Elise Park, as soon as I went into the testing center, I went and on my sheet of paper, and I was given a sheet of paper. Um, I know sometimes you're given a whiteboard with a marker. So I was given a sheet of paper. So I sat down and on that sheet of paper, I immediately wrote down all my acronyms and just that trigger word that reminded me of what that subdivision was. And I'll explain to you why this works. What happens is when you're in a coaching setting, or even when we're answering these coaching answers, we are really using it's the right side of the brain. So I'm using the right side of the brain to think about the creative answers, to think about, uh, you know, um, what is a good solution, to think out of the box. But when I write down the acronyms and when I'm writing down the signal words, I'm really using the left side of my brain. So what happens is when I'm in the flow of answering with my right side of my brain, and I'm suddenly asked a question like, well, which competency does intuition lie in? It throws me off balance a little bit. Now, I don't know if it's the same for everybody, but it took me a little bit of time to answer those type of questions. And I recognize that, which is why I said, if I have this list in front of me, I just go to the list and I see, oh, intuition, that falls under coaching mindset. And I go ahead and I answer the question. And I can then go ahead using the right side of my brain and answer the rest of the questions. Now, my next tip has nothing to do with actually being in the testing situation. It has more to do with choosing the test center. Now, the first time I chose a test center based on proximity. So this test center that I chose was about 15 minutes from my place. I'd never been to this building before, but I said, it's close by, it makes sense. And it wasn't a good idea. So I went there. The room was dark. The computers were really old, so it made dragging and dropping really difficult. And there was some construction going on outside, and the noise was deafening. So it made taking the exam really challenging. So the next time, or this time when I did it earlier this week, I chose a building which was in the central business district where a lot of big offices are housed. And I was familiar with the building. And I went in and I had an amazing testing experience because the light was bright, the computers were new, and it was quiet. So as far as the testing experience was concerned, I was much happier with my second choice. And that's because I didn't just choose the center based on proximity. I did a little bit of my homework and I decided it based on other factors as well. Now let's go on to the game. So, what is the game that really helped me understand and integrate the learning so much better? So, what I did was 2 days before my exam, I was a bit confused as to, whenever I was faced with questions like intuition, when I was faced with questions like silence, where does it fall? Which competency does it come under? It threw me off balance a little bit. I kind of wasn't sure whether it would be under one competency or the other. And it must have been because of that whole right brain, left brain thing. So I devised this game that would help me be quicker with these subdivisions and also make it a little bit more fun because let's face it, it's a bit boring to sit down and read these again and again in the same format, in the same sequence. And sometimes we can just zone off. So what I did was I made this, I wrote down the 8 competencies on a sheet of paper. So you can see here, it's a really simple thing. I just took one of these A4 sheets and, wrote down ethical practice, coaching mindset, maintains presence. Made sure to do it in order so that, I have an idea of what comes first, which is the first, which is the second. And then I made these little flashcards, 2 by 2 inch flashcards, which could fit inside my boxes. They fit nicely inside the boxes, right? And then I shuffled them. Like I've got some here, but I made much more than that. I mean, so what I did was I made these flashcards for those subdivisions where I was a little unclear. So it's something like client centric is very simple. We know that that belongs in the coaching mindset and we won't get confused. But something like silence, right? Silence can be so powerful, but it can really belong in any competency. I mean, it can be in maintains presence, it can be in awareness, it can be in coaching mindset, trust and safety. So where do these actually belong? So I shoved these flashcards and then I tested myself. And I would put them in places like this is ongoing learning. Where does ongoing learning comes? Oh, it comes in coaching mindset. Challenges. When do you challenge your client? Okay, when you want to evoke awareness. Referrals. Like referrals could be in what? Maintaining agreement, maintaining. It could be in so many different places, but it's ethical practice. Energy shift. Notice and mention the energy shift. Where could that be? Active listening. In this way, I tried to place all the flashcards in the chart that I've made. I remember the first time I did it, I had like a bunch of cards that I wasn't able to place quickly enough. And so I kept practicing it. By the end of the evening, I had become pretty good at this. And by the next day, I was actually getting most of my subdivisions correct. So this made it fun. It also integrated this learning in my knowledge. And it's really interesting, but I think I was thinking in a very siloed or a very categorized way, right? Because you keep reading the same subdivisions within the same competency. So I was thinking in a very structured way. This game allowed me to think a little bit more holistically. And I also began to understand why it is that ICF made these subdivisions the way that they did. Why did they categorize silence, for instance, in trust and safety and not in something else? There's a reason that they did this. And it actually came to me as when I was playing the game. So if you like, this is really easy to make. You just have to get a foolscap sheet. I just used a Sharpie and I made my little chart, and it's really rough. You can see my handwriting, it's nothing great, just a piece of paper, cut up strips of pages and put it there, but it was helpful. So in conclusion, the ICF exam for ACC accreditation isn't that difficult, but it isn't completely easy as well. I wish you all the very best of luck. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me by just putting in your comments below, and I will answer as soon as I can. And just remember, you're all great coaches. You don't need an accreditation to say that you're a great coach. So if you pass, that's great. But if you don't, that's great as well, because it'll give you an experience. You'll know exactly how to do the exam and how to approach it the next time. I really hope this video has been useful, and I'm wishing all of you the very best. Thank you for listening to me.